3 desperate convicts.
Prisoners sentenced to Alcatraz were all hard asses.
An escape-proof prison.
They asked me, if I wanted a piece of the action.
And an unsolved mystery.
And I'd say we're moving out toward the west.
I am just puzzled why these 3 bodies were never found.
Yeah, it's going with the current, man. It's taking line.
Did they make it to freedom or die trying?
These guys had a lot of reason, to want to make it. Certainly more than I do.
Five, 4, 3, 2, 1. Mark 1.
When investigators look for new answers,
You don't close a case when you don't have a body.
the journey takes us beneath Alcatraz. June 11, 1962, Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary. In the dead of night, 3 prisoners did the impossible. Desperate and dangerous, they escaped from Alcatraz. Only traces of their bold breakout were found in the frigid San Francisco Bay. The men were never seen or heard from again. Their fate has remained a mystery. Did they survive their bid for freedom, or did they lose everything to the San Francisco Bay? Now, a new team of investigators want answers to this unsolved mystery.
The role of mystery is superb. This is a superb mystery novel. I, even a participant, don't know from the minute they left the island, whether they're in Mexico or where they went to, or someone killed them or they died. I don't know what happened to them. I don't know what the aftermath was.
Today, the Bay Area's own scientists and researchers are looking to the San Francisco Bay for new answers. Scientists like Dr. Ralph Chang, an expert in the Bay's hydrodynamic properties; Tom Belcher, a specialist in underwater investigations; the Bay Model's hydraulic engineer Dan Schaff; record-breaking rough water swimmer Fred Ferrojaro; and Alcatraz historian Jolene Babiak.
Oh, it's a nasty place to work. The currents are just tormenting, and the wind is annoying. It's a tough place to work, except on very few days a year.
Oh, baby! And I don't mean to dramatize it, but these are tough conditions. It's not a warm pool with lane lines and walls and people there to help you if you do fail.
With high-tech tools, decades of research, and hands-on knowledge, they'll determine whether Morris and the Anglins made it to freedom.
I asked myself, is this possible? As a scientist, I would ask the question, you say, there were 3 people who attempted escaping from Alcatraz. Their bodies were never found. So I take that stand and take a look at it.
There are 5 key questions to answer. What were the tide conditions the night of the escape? Was their homemade raft seaworthy? If their raft floundered, would they be able to swim the 1 3/4 to their intended destination at Angel Island? If they couldn't reach Angel Island, where would they go? And finally, if they drowned, what happened to their bodies? Alcatraz, the Rock, located 1.25 miles from shore in the heart of the San Francisco Bay. In 1934, it opened as the nation's first ultra-maximum security prison. Its purpose? To house America's most incorrigible prisoners. The 260 single-man cells filled with gangsters like Al Capone, Doc Barker, and Creepy Karpus. There were bank robbers, kidnappers, and cold-blooded killers.
Prisoners sentenced to Alcatraz were all hard asses. They were prisoners who caused trouble in other prisons, federal prisons, and they were always prisoners that tried to escape.
These are men who came there for their behavior, which meant they worked their ways up from the reform schools, the state prisons, the federal prisons, and ultimately to Alcatraz. They came there because of their behavior. They were long-term incarcerated men.
With a ratio of 1 guard to every 3 prisoners, full-body metal detectors, 4 guard towers, and minimal communication with the outside world, the security at Alcatraz was designed to suppress the troublemakers.
You could never get away from the guards. It was very difficult. Every time there was a major movement, there was a count. And there were counts all through the night, and the counts were checked with the control center, and you just had this absolute tight security.
For the prisoners, the isolation, the repetition, and the proximity to the freedom of nearby San Francisco made life on the island depressing, if not intolerable. The only relief was the dream of escape.
That was the greatest fantasy in the world, to keep from going crazy. It was a game that we played. We plotted escapes all the time.
I would say that constantly there was always at least 50 or 80 inmates out of the 200 who were scheming ways and avenues of escaping from Alcatraz.
Over the years, the escape attempts varied, from overpowering guards, to sawing through cell bars, to constructing a makeshift raft, to masquerading as a military officer. All prisoners had 3 main challenges: to overcome the constant security, to find a way out of the cell house, and to get across the San Francisco Bay. The water was always the biggest obstacle, cold and filled with extreme currents.
A number of guys jumped in the water, turned around and came back because it was too cold. Immediately they realized they were in trouble.
It was also rumored to be full of sharks.
There is the possibility of shark attack. This is a very large great white shark breeding ground to the north of us here, from Marin up to Mendocino.
Well, we encouraged the belief that there were sharks out there in the bay, and indeed there were, but they weren't man-eaters. Although on occasion I've seen a great white out there circling around.
In the penitentiary's 29-year history, there were 14 documented escape attempts. None were successful. 5 convicts were presumed drowned, 7 were shot and killed, and 2 were executed. All ended up either back in the island prison or dead. By 1960, there had been 12 escape attempts from Alcatraz. The most daring breakout was yet to come. Historian Jolene Babiak is one of the foremost authorities on Alcatraz and its most famous escape.
By 1960s, the plan on Alcatraz was to improve every other plan that had happened beforehand. I mean, this was the 13th escape attempt. So they had a lot of knowledge about prior escape attempts that had gone wrong and exactly why they had gone wrong.
And so the stage was set for 4 convicts, with the help of countless other prisoners, to plan and execute an escape unlike any other. Tom Kent, one of the prisoners who assisted the team, remembers when the plan was hatched.
This escape got started with Alan West. That was his idea. We all heard it together from him. Alan West was carrying a paint can. He was painting the cells, and he said, "I just found a way out." We said, "What are you talking about, way out?" He said, "I found an escape route on top of B block."
Alan West was a convict serving 10 years for car theft. His job in cell house maintenance, cleaning and painting the prison, took him to the top of the cell block. It was there that he found the exit to freedom, an old disused air vent that hadn't been cemented closed.
Well, this is the top of B cell block. This is the cell block that the 3 men escaped from back in 1962. And they escaped right out through this vent over my head. All they had to do was remove the 6 bolts, push the wagon wheel out through the roof, and of course, they were able to get out.
West brought in John and Clarence Anglin, two career criminals from the swamplands of Florida. They'd been transferred to Alcatraz after escape attempts from Lewisburg and Leavenworth federal penitentiaries.
John was kind of a good old boy, aw shucks, easygoing, congenial, drifter, not very employable.
He told us he was a very good swimmer, and that was very important. He had to be a good swimmer.
Clarence was regarded as the rougher of the two.
He was much more aggressive, was kind of a smart ass. Both of them were loudmouths.
They seemed to enjoy more breaking the law than abiding by it.
The fourth member of the team was a convict named Frank Morris. He was a bank robber and an accomplished escape artist. Starting as a child, he ran away from foster homes, then reform schools, training schools, chain gangs, and prisons. By the time he was in Alcatraz at age 35, he'd spent less than 2 years of his adult life as a free man.
Frank was quiet, he was intelligent. He was very determined to get out.
Over the months, the foursome devised a plan. They'd dig out of their cells through an air vent that led to a utility corridor, climb the pipes in the corridor to the top of the cell block, escape from the cell house to the roof vent, and paddle away from the island in a raft they'd make themselves, using stolen, Navy-issue rubberized raincoats. All without being detected by the guards and the 24-hour security.
This was a tremendous fear, to be caught on the island in the middle of the night by armed guards trying to escape from Alcatraz. The odds were that you would probably get shot.
For months, the prisoners chipped away at the concrete surrounding the air vents in their cells, using handcrafted tools made from stolen supplies. They concealed the openings with painted canvas board grill covers.
If you walked in the cell, you couldn't tell any difference. You would have to get down on your hands and knees and look real closely to see that it was there.
By May 1962, the Anglins and Morris were able to get out of their cells and climb the pipes in the utility corridor to the top of the cell block. With materials pilfered from the prison industries, they began cutting the bolts on the roof vent and crafting the rubber raft, life vests, and wooden paddles.
They could only work up here an hour and a half each night. This was a long-term thing. It was very slow, very patient to do it.
So the prisoners could leave their cells undetected and work at night on top of the cell block, they handcrafted masks, which they placed in their beds after lights out at 9:30. Dummy heads, which the guards counted at night for weeks.
This is one of the dummy masks that was used. This is actually the most sophisticated of all of them. The ear is absolutely almost perfect. The head itself was probably made of, concrete, which is just a powder that you mix with water. And then you probably have oil paints, a very common prison item, which forms the skin coloring.
The support and silence of the other prisoners was essential to the plan.
Anybody who was anybody here knew what was going on and probably helped in one way or another. I helped. I sent drill bits in hollowed out chair legs up through the metal detectors.
All right, let's go.
June 11th, 1962. The raft and life vests were complete, and the group was ready to go. But Alan West had waited too long to chip away the last bit of cement around his vent.
He was crying and weeping and gnashing his teeth. I would cry too if I had been in his place. It was his escape, so his idea.
Around 10:30 at night, Frank Morris and John and Clarence Anglin pushed off the metal vent cover and climbed out into the cool night air. They ran across the roof of the cell house and shimmied to the ground on an exhaust pipe. With their raft, paddles, and life vests, they ran over fences, through shrubbery, and down the steep side of the island. At the rocky shore, they inflated the raft with an accordion-like instrument called a concertina and pushed off into the San Francisco Bay. At 7:20 the following morning, the guards did the stand-up count. Within minutes, the sirens were roaring, and so began one of the biggest manhunts in history.
Well, the headlines were that big. Alcatraz escape. I mean, the skyways were buzzing with aircraft, and there was Coast Guard and the police.
The search took investigators over every inch of the San Francisco Bay, the surrounding shoreline, and especially Angel Island. Don Eberly was the FBI special agent in charge of the investigation.
We had teams of FBI agents going along the shore to ensure that the inmates had not landed over there. Not only to find out, but to alert the people of the potential danger.
Investigators quickly uncovered their plan. They intended to paddle 1.75 miles to Angel Island, then cross the bay again to the mainland in Marin County.
And they intended to get away from the Bay Area as soon as they could and as fast as they could.
In the following days, evidence began to accumulate. First on top of the cell house, where they found a life vest, a paddle, and an unfinished part of a raft. Then on June 12th, the day after the escape, a paddle was found floating in the bay near Angel Island. 2 days later, a debris boat found a second crucial piece of evidence, a waterproof packet belonging to the Anglins. It contained dozens of photographs, names, and addresses, contacts to the outside world. Oscar McGregor was a deckhand on the boat that recovered the packet.
It was like they took great pains to keep it watertight. And it didn't appear to us that it was wet. It was wet, it was inside plastic, and you could see that there was pictures. And he had his name on it. One of the Anglin brothers' name was on there.
The following day, a life vest washed up on Cronkite Beach, 2.5 miles outside the Golden Gate. It was identical to the vest found in the cell house. And finally, 11 days after the escape, the last piece of evidence was picked up in the bay, a life vest found floating 100 yards off the eastern end of Alcatraz. The strings were still knotted at the back, as though the person who'd been wearing it had slipped out. By June 22nd, the FBI had collected 3 life vests, a partially finished pontoon, 2 paddles, and a packet of photos and addresses. After that, there was only silence from the bay and the missing prisoners. There were no traces along the shoreline, no indication that the men had ever reached their destination.
Of course, the Clint Eastwood movie found a flower on Angel Island that only grows on Alcatraz. This is a movie myth. There was absolutely nothing found on land ever again.
In 1962 and today, investigators asked the same question: dead or alive, where did these 3 men go? Since Frank Morris and John and Clarence Anglin disappeared, mystery has surrounded their fate. Some are certain they drowned.
First of all, it's my belief that those 3 men died.
Some are certain they made it.
Well, they made it. They made it. That's all I heard. For 3 or 4 days, as God is my witness, I heard from different guys with me that were in the escape. You know, that was the common accepted term between all the cars. They made it. They made it. They made it.
To solve the mystery, there are questions to be answered. Were the tides working for or against the escaping prisoners? Could their homemade raft hold up in the bay? If their raft sank, would they be able to swim to Angel Island? Where would they go if they couldn't reach Angel Island? If they drowned, what happened to their bodies?
So right now, can I get the coordinates?
Today, with new technology and an even greater understanding of the bay waters, researchers, scientists, and those who navigate its currents are gathered to look for the answers to these questions.
I am just puzzled why these 3 bodies were never found.
And it'll be a sheet of glass, and I'll go outside around past Point Bonita, and it'll be 14-foot breaking seas. You know, you can't imagine how things can change so quickly.
Coast Guard Petty Officer Steve Millay navigates the bay on as many as 400 search and rescue missions a year and is all too familiar with its dangers.
The currents can scream through here if the ebb's right, you know, if you get it at the right time.
The San Francisco Bay is one of the world's most complex estuaries. Fed by 2 rivers, the bottom topography is a mosaic of depths, from 3-foot shallows to a 300-foot channel under the Golden Gate Bridge. These uneven depths contribute to the extremely complex and often unpredictable currents that run throughout the bay.
The bay is wider to the east, and then it gets narrow right here at the bridge, and then it's wider again past it, so it squeezes through and the currents speed up, and sometimes when it hits the opposing currents it gets really rough right under the bridge.
Uneven currents can also create forces in the water known as eddies or vortexes.
If you see 2 velocity vectors, one goes faster than the other, the water tends to rotate like this.
Twice each day, the tide cycles in and out of the bay. When water flows in through the Golden Gate, it's called flooding. When it drains back out to the ocean, the cycle is known as ebbing. The still water periods in between are called slack tide. It's during slack water that trained swimmers accustomed to the cold attempt their swims in the bay.
Whenever they do their swims around Alcatraz or across the bridge, it's always a slack water. They don't try it at full ebb, you know, they don't do that.
But it wasn't slack water when Morris and the Anglins pushed out into the San Francisco Bay. The tide was ebbing, moving out the Golden Gate towards the Pacific Ocean. Dr. Ralph Cheng is a senior hydrologist with the U.S. Geological Survey and one of the foremost authorities on the hydraulic properties of the San Francisco Bay. Armed with the historical tide data, Dr. Cheng is able to recreate the tides from the night of the escape and run them on his numerical computer model. He starts at 10 p.m., at least 1 hour before the prisoners enter the water.
10 o'clock, water is pretty much like slack water over here. You can see a hint of beginning of an ebbing cycle.
Hour by hour, Dr. Cheng looks at the changing tide. At 11 o'clock, the outgoing tide begins to pick up speed. By 1 o'clock in the morning, the current reaches maximum velocity beneath the Golden Gate Bridge, a speed of 2.7 knots or 3.1 miles per hour.
I estimate a current near around the island is something like 1.5 knots. So there's a fairly strong current for that period of time that they enter the bay.
With choppy waters, turbulent vortexes, and an ebb tide running swiftly out to the Pacific Ocean at speeds up to 2.7 knots, the conditions that the prisoners faced were daunting. Facing the treacherous waters, they would need a stable vessel capable of navigating the deadly currents. But all the prisoners had was a homemade raft, crafted out of rubberized raincoats, stitched together by hand, and sealed with rubber adhesive. Could their vessel have survived the turbulent conditions of the bay?
The problem here is not the material so much. The problem here is the sealing. How good and how minutely did they actually glue the edges? Because that's where you're going to get leaks, I think.
The raft was inspired by an article in Sports Illustrated magazine. The craft was reported to be 14 feet long and 6 feet wide.
But 6 by 14 feet would be a horrible size in that bay. The wave action alone would make it really unstable. And if you're talking 14 feet of glued seams, if they're not absolutely perfect, then that raft's going down.
Alcatraz historian Jolene Babiak and former FBI Special Agent Don Everly are both convinced that the raft quickly floundered in the turbulent water.
I could visualize that homemade raft going out into the waves, bouncing up and down, and I could foresee it turning over. and dumping the occupants into the bay. And I think that's probably what accounted for the recovering of the packet and a couple life preservers.
Given the outbound tide, swift currents, and the weakness of the raft, it's likely the prisoners quickly found themselves in the bay off the northwest end of Alcatraz. With the water a breathtaking 50 degrees and air temperatures of 49 degrees, the men faced a frightening reality. They had almost 1.75 miles between themselves and Angel Island. Could they really swim across the outbound tide to reach their destination?
I don't think you could anticipate just how cold this water is without having experienced it before.
So the current is now pulling toward Alcatraz.
Tom Belcher is Vice President of Underwater Resources, a marine technology company specializing in commercial diving and ROV operations. After reviewing the historical tide data, Tom wants to know how difficult it would be to swim from the treacherous waters near Alcatraz to Angel Island on an ebb tide similar to the night of the escape.
They had a real drive to get away, but not knowing the bay that we would know with the wind, the currents, and all the problems, the cold water, to say the least.
Get on that stern, watch out for the roller, it'll move on you.
To see just how challenging this feat would be, Tom will work with Fred Ferrojaro, a rough water swimmer who's agreed to attempt the swim.
Well, normally the swims I do in the bay are at slack tide or with the current. Today I'm going to be going against a very strong cross current. And that's a losing battle. That means I'm going to have to aim quite a bit to the east and let it sweep me back towards the island, as it will. So that's a big challenge. And it was, as it was for them, it will be for me.
On an overcast morning in June, just days away from the anniversary of the escape, the research vessel the White Lightning drops anchor on the north side of Alcatraz, about 150 yards offshore of where the prisoners originally entered the water. Tom's crew includes a safety support team, technicians, and a diver to document the swim with a camera. Their decision to work in daylight is based solely on safety. At 5 feet 9 inches and 140 pounds, a weight similar to those of the 3 inmates, Fred Ferrojaro has very little body fat. While he swims recreationally in the San Francisco Bay, sometimes competing in races, his biggest challenge is the cold water. Today, it's 54 degrees, 4 degrees warmer than the night of the escape. With an air temperature of 55 degrees, Fred prepares mentally and physically for the swim ahead. Because approximately 50% of the body's heat is lost through the head, Fred puts on not 1, but 4 swim caps. One is 1/4-inch thick neoprene. With water temperatures this cold, he wouldn't consider swimming the bay without them.
That heat release is much quicker, and that the onset of the cooling effect would be that much greater and quicker.
Fred also has other concerns, like sharks, especially the great whites that live just outside the Golden Gate.
Absolutely. There are documented shark attacks inside the gate. And that thought is always way back in your mind as well.
Tom checks the currents. The speed of the ebb tide measures 1.7 knots. The conditions are almost the same as the night of the escape. Off the northwest end of Alcatraz, in an area where the escaping prisoners' raft may have floundered, Fred Ferrojaro begins his swim to Angel Island, across a full outbound tide. Fred swims as hard as he can across the currents. A safety boat stays nearby to monitor his condition and help if he's in distress.
How you going, Freddie? Soon as full of water. You gonna take it off? Okay. Nothing just went up down?
I seem to have about, an hour to an hour and a half limit. and then I start to lose ground to hypothermia, and eventually start swimming in circles.
Hypothermia, or the lowering of the body's core temperature, can be deadly. An average adult unaccustomed to the cold has only a 50-50 chance of surviving a 50-yard swim in 50-degree water. Swimming or even treading water can reduce survival time by as much as 50%. Within 1 to 2 hours, they may become unconscious.
First thing I lose is the control of my baby finger, and it spreads to the index finger, and you begin to get cold in the hands and feet, so it's a distal thing, and it creeps towards your core, your trunk.
The team on the safety craft also tracks Fred's swim with a handheld GPS so they can map his course under the ebb tide conditions.
GPS stands for Global Positioning System, and the government has placed satellites in the atmosphere that actually locate your position by triangulating on the Earth.
Freddie, how you going, man? How are you?
After 35 minutes and 3/4 of a mile, Fred decides he's had enough. Cold and exhausted, Fred climbs out of the San Francisco Bay.
Another one.
It seemed like I could hold my line pretty well. The hard part was the chop, because I breathe into the chop this way, so I was eating away when I breathed.
Fred Ferraggiaro had all the advantages a bay swimmer could want: caps, goggles, cold water training, and a safety boat.
And after about 10 or 15 minutes or so, I started to feel this, breakdown of my hands first. And I imagine I started to slow down, and I could feel my feet getting cold. And, slowly my trunk was beginning to chill as well. So I thought it was time to get out.
A map of the GPS coordinates shows the actual course of Fred's swim, a 3/4 mile journey heading to the west of Angel Island.
If the current was running then like it did today, I don't see how they could really make land at Angel Island.
If a seasoned professional like Fred was unable to make his way to Angel Island, clearly it was almost an impossible task for Morris and the Anglins. Faced with a strong ebb tide moving towards the Golden Gate, a sinking raft, and the impossible challenge of swimming to Angel Island, it's likely the prisoners found themselves cold and exhausted and floating towards the Golden Gate Bridge. How long would it have taken them to reach the narrow channel beneath the bridge, where they might have been able to swim across the bay's swiftest currents to reach land?
I think if there's any chance for them to survive the water here, they would be smart to swimming following the streamline, following the flow, and leaving the island without fighting against the flow.
To answer this question, Ralph Cheng turns to his computer model, a simulation based on recorded field studies and containing 160,000 points of data that refer to variables like water depth, velocity, and tide cycles. Dr. Cheng programs drifting particles that represent the prisoners into his numerical model. As he runs the computer animation, the colored particles show where the tide would have taken the men and their belongings.
Then I reproduce the tides and currents for that period of time and watch where these particles or objects have gone to.
Dr. Cheng runs the simulated tide cycle with the particles entering the water off of Alcatraz at 10 p.m., 11 p.m., and finally midnight.
But in terms of the fate of these objects, the most important thing for us to see is the first few hours.
In each simulation, the particles representing the prisoners reach the Golden Gate Bridge in roughly 2 hours. 2 hours in freezing cold water.
As you can see, in about 2 hours or so, they would have been drifted into a region very near the Golden Gate Bridge. I think insofar as escaping is concerned, the process is done. Either they were drawn or they had escaped.
But in 2 hours, it's likely that hypothermia and exhaustion would have set in, making it physically impossible for the men to fight the swift currents beneath the Golden Gate Bridge, their final chance to reach land.
In 47 to 50 degree water, the average person who is not inured to the temperature will succumb within 30 minutes. Usually in 15 minutes you are almost helpless as far as movement of the limbs is concerned. And once that happens, you sink like a stone.
Before the men would have been able to reach land, they would have drowned. And drowning is exactly what Jolene Babiak thinks happened to Frank Morris and John and Clarence Anglin. For Morris, that may have been just offshore of Alcatraz.
And I think that in the case of Frank Morris, frankly, he was the smallest, he had the least body weight. He probably had very little swimming experience, given that he'd always been in prison. And I think he probably succumbed fairly quickly, and maybe it was panic. The Anglin brothers, given more swimming experience, might have hung on longer. But ultimately, everything was going out the gate and to the Pacific Ocean.
The three men gave everything to the escape, most likely even their lives. Given the outbound tide and the men's limited survival time in 50-degree water, it's likely that Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers perished in the San Francisco Bay. Yet the massive bay search found no traces of the men in the water or on the shore. Only the final question remains. With the three men dead in the water, what happened to their bodies?
So about that much died? How much died oil?
Dan Schaff, the hydraulic engineer at the San Francisco Bay model, set out to answer that question. Where did the bodies go?
I had no idea if they'd head straight for the Golden Gate, if they would go past the Golden Gate.
Housed in a 3-acre building in Sausalito, the scale model of the bay has been used for more than 40 years to study the San Francisco Bay's hydrodynamic properties. Today, Dan and his team of engineers have programmed the model's computer to run the historical tides for the days leading up to and following the escape.
The computer's job is quite simply to make sure that the valves follow the ideal curve that we've programmed in. And then it attempts to make these yellow and green lines, which are the actual water heights on the model, attempts to make them follow the light blue curve. And that would generate a pretty much very accurate tide.
Well, this time when you put it in, just kind of feather it in, let the dye so just kind of needle itself out real slow.
Their plan is to track the path of the prisoners' bodies with a process called particle disbursement. The prisoners and their belongings are represented by paper particles and colored dye.
Well, what we're looking for now is the position of the confetti within the model so that we can have a better understanding of, okay, what direction the tides were pulling the escapees or the debris that they were bringing along with them, whether it be the life raft or an oar.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Mark 1. Mark 1.
As the tide moves into ebb cycle on the night of June 11th, Dan pours the paper particles into the water at the northwest end of Alcatraz. Quickly, the particles disperse.
2, 1. Mark.
Mark.
Next, he tries the experiment with colored dye. Each time he repeats the test, the movement of the particles and the colored dye is similar.
They dispersed longitudinally, but I'd say the majority of them made their way past the Golden Gate, and I'd say the tail end, maybe 10% of them stayed between Alcatraz and the Golden Gate.
Of particular interest is the collection of particles that consistently circles around the end of Alcatraz, caught in an eddy.
It looks like they'd almost be pushed back on shore on this far side of the island. So that could have been a problem. And it might have been turbulent where they were capsized. It's hard to say, but I could believe that theory. And I could also really believe the theory that they got swept underneath the Golden Gate, because we keep seeing particles and dye, the majority of it, go right underneath the Golden Gate.
Both the Bay model study and Ralph Cheng's numerical model show the tide pulling the bodies out to the Pacific Ocean. But the Bay model reveals another scenario, reinforcing Jolene Babiak's theory that Morris, the weakest swimmer, drowned close to the island. The Bay model shows that Morris could easily have been caught in the whirlpools that form at the western end of Alcatraz, trapping him and ending his plan to escape from Alcatraz.
This is only going to get worse the more ebb current we get.
Yeah.
Using the results from the Bay model showing the eddies around Alcatraz and the strong westward movement of the current, Tom Belcher and his team head back to Alcatraz on the White Lightning to further explore the possible paths of Frank Morris and John and Clarence Anglin's bodies. He has two questions. Where would the bodies travel if they were floating on the surface? And where would they travel if they sank to the bottom? Using regulation search and rescue dummies that have the same weight and movement as an unconscious person in the water, their plan is to use GPS to track their course. The tide and current conditions are again similar to the night of June 11, 1962. As the boat approaches the northwest shore of Alcatraz, the team preps the dummy for the first test. First with a life vest, assuming that the convicts may have initially worn the vest they made.
Yes, radio.
Working on the theory that the raft floundered early in the journey and that Morris drowned close to shore, the crew lowers the dummy into the Boston whaler and heads to a target location 300 yards off the northwest end of the island.
Yeah, kind of head toward the northwest corner there where that tall tower.
On Tom's signal, they release the dummy. Even with a westerly wind blowing into the bay, the dummy is immediately pulled out by the current and heads straight towards the Golden Gate. If the men, unconscious from hypothermia, slipped out of their life vests, their bodies would have been completely at the bay's mercy, taking in water and eventually sinking to the bottom. Tom's next test is to see the effect of the bottom currents on the dummy without the life vest. The team removes the vest and heads out again in the Boston whaler. Testing the theory that Morris's body may have gone down almost immediately, they again release the dummy into the water off the northwest shore of the island.
Okay, anytime. Go up.
This time they let it sink to the bottom to a depth of 100 feet. The greater the depth, the more the water pressure compresses the body cavity. The chances of the body rising to the surface diminish. The team on the whaler has 400 feet of line attached to the dummy, so they can stay with it but not lose it. In the 100 feet of water, there is plenty of slack line, so the dummy can rest freely on the bottom without being dragged by the boat. Every 3 minutes, they record its GPS coordinates.
Go ahead and give me another reading if you can from where you are now.
3749.91 degrees north.
Seem to be moving on the bottom.
25.55 degrees west.
Are you able to maintain a good angle on that so that you're not holding back the dummy?
It's going with the current, man. It's taking line.
Pretty easy not to be dragging the dummy then, Roger.
The dummy's dragging us. We're not dragging it.
What we have is the line going down to the dummy is being kept mostly slack, but it's giving us the direction that the dummy is being pulled, and they're powering the boat to follow that to keep slack in that line. But there's a pretty good force on the dummy that's actually moving it on the bottom, along the bottom, right now back into the direction toward Alcatraz.
How deep? How deep? 95? 98?
What's your coordinates now?
3749.91 degrees north.
122.25.69 degrees west.
Huh. The Great Circle.
For an hour, they track the dummy. At first, it seems that it's trapped by the currents near the island.
Well, there's a deep channel that goes to this side, the west of Alcatraz, and it appears to ride up a little bit and hit an eddy, causing a circular counterclockwise rotational direction.
But then, the body begins moving west. The GPS coordinates indicate that the tide is slowly dragging the dummy towards the Golden Gate Bridge.
In a second, 60 feet, so it's cooking along pretty good.
So we appear to be moving, and I'd say we're moving out toward the west.
I'll buy that.
The results of Tom Belcher's test are clear. Whether floating on the surface or dragged along the bottom of the bay, the tide was taking the bodies on a westward journey, just as it probably took the bodies of Frank Morris and John and Clarence Anglin in June of 1962, after they escaped from Alcatraz. On June 11, 1962, Frank Morris and John and Clarence Anglin did the impossible. They escaped from Alcatraz. But their journey into the bay was hopeless. They entered swift currents heading straight out to the Pacific Ocean. Evidence suggests their homemade raft quickly floundered, dumping the men and their gear into the bay. Morris, the weakest swimmer, was probably swept west towards the eddies that form at the tip of Alcatraz, where he quickly drowned. The Anglin brothers may have been able to swim further into the bay, but any efforts to reach Angel Island would have quickly sapped their strength. Within 2 hours, they would have been overcome by the cold, turbulent water.
If you gulp in water, you're in the first stages of drowning, and then the cold seeps in. If you've got a heavy coat on, if you've got your shoes on, you begin to lose traction and you begin to go under.
The men's bodies, whether floating on the surface in their vests or tumbling along the bottom of the bay, were headed out the Golden Gate, ultimately eaten by marine life, forever lost to the Pacific Ocean. The manhunt for Frank Morris and John and Clarence Anglin went on for years. Even today, because no bodies were ever found, the case is still open with the U.S. Marshal's Office.
You don't close a case when you don't have a body.
Now, after 4 decades, thanks to high-tech tools and a close-up look at the bay itself, the mystery may be solved. On June 11, 1962, Frank Morris and John and Clarence Anglin challenged the San Francisco Bay and lost. Still, despite the evidence and the scientific research, the power of the myth is legendary. People still want to believe it's possible to beat the rock and beat the bay.
Well, it's kind of like rooting for the underdog, and here you have the supreme underdog convict on an island who doesn't have any chance of escaping, and you want him to win against odds that are completely against him.
These guys had a lot of reason, to want to make it. Certainly more than I do. I got up in a warm bed this morning with my family around me. These guys were, living in a cell, so I'm sure they were very passionate about making it.
They disappeared off the face of the earth, which was the best proof to us that they had got away.
It was a brilliant plan, executed by bold and determined men looking for a route to freedom. In the end, we'll never know the real drama the men faced. The truth lies beneath Alcatraz.